Does state law allow cities and counties to ban cannabis dispensaries, even though voters approved the use of medical marijuana?
The legislature knows how to say, "Thou shalt not ban dispensaries." They didn't say that.
That's the question before California's highest court this week. The ruling could have a huge impact on the state's massive medical marijuana industry. Job growth in Silicon Valley is outpacing the rest of the nation, but a new report says the income gap between rich and poor is widening, leaving some minorities behind. With the number of people riding bicycles rising fast, San Francisco planners roll out a multi-million-dollar strategy to add bike lanes, parking stations, and other improvements. We'll talk with the head of the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition. Plus, California takes the first step to grant special protection to the ocean's top predator. Coming up next. Good evening and welcome to This Week in Northern California. I'm Scott Shafer. Well, we hoped we'd be talking about this week's Super Bowl victory parade for the San Francisco 49ers, but it didn't quite work out that way. The good news, well, we still have plenty to delve into. And joining me on our news panel tonight are Paul Rogers, San Jose Mercury News environment writer, Peter Hecht, Sacramento Bee reporter and author of Weedland, due out later this year from University of California Press, and Kara Swisher, editor of All Things Digital. Well, Silicon Valley's economic growth is outpacing the rest of the state in terms of jobs and per capita income, posting some of the highest numbers since the recession. That according to a study released today at the annual State of the Valley conference in San Jose. Kara, you were there with the movers and shakers in the Valley. Give us a sense of the mood. Are people feeling pretty good about the economy?
I mean, it's the one part of the economy and across globally that the U.S. excels in and continues to excel in. And, you know, there's been a lot of job growth in the area. There's been a lot of innovation. Some of the stocks are up, not all of them. And so it's a really good time right now, especially in an economy that has issues all over the place.
Yeah. One of the things that came out in the State of the Valley report was that San Francisco has really grown as a tech hub, and it's now really San Jose, San Francisco, and everything in between is really the tech center. Talk more about that. How did that happen?
Well,
did it happen overnight, or is it?
Well, some of the lovely Edley tax cuts are nice for some of these, for Twitter and things like that. But I think it's, you know, there's a certain class of people in these new companies like Twitter, like Zynga, like some of the others, many others, that want to live in a city, want to live in an urban environment, don't want to get on a Google bus and drive down 101 every day. And Google and others also want to serve that population of their employees. And so, you know, it's good to do both, have opportunities in both places. And so this urban, I call them urban hipsters, essentially want to stay in San Francisco, and so they're opening offices here.
Yeah, and does San Francisco have a particular niche in the industry, or not really?
You know, it's not the device-heavy kind of Cisco, the big data kind of things. It's more in the consumer space, mostly consumer. Airbnb is here, all cloud is here. There's all kinds of companies like that that are here, and they're more in this either the software or the app space.
You know, one of the other things that happened this week was Texas Governor Rick Perry was making a lot of noise saying that California's high taxes and tough environmental laws are going to make companies and rich people in the Bay Area want to move to Texas. He's coming here to make this this pitch. What are the chances of people en masse leaving Silicon Valley to go to Texas?
Not so much.
Why
He makes a lot of noise all the time, doesn't he? I think probably because, you know, people like the kind of people that work at these tech companies is a very different type of personality. It's much more diverse, much more tolerant. I think it's probably a place that they like living, the San Francisco area. There are issues around taxes and the way you live and what you can get there. But I think that, you know, there's a lot of tech in Texas, in Austin. Dell is going for a new life now with this new buyout they announced this week. So there's a very vibrant culture there, and South by Southwest is coming up soon. But I think that this is analog, even though we're living in a digital age, and just like Hollywood or Detroit, this is the analog center of the tech revolution that continues.
Although I imagine certainly a lot of the tech folks would love to have some of the things they have in Texas in terms of lower regulations and, as you said, taxation.
Well, they don't want any regulation.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, just stay out of their way.
Yeah, exactly, because they know what's right for everything, because they're smarter than you are. I don't know if you know that. I think one of the things that a lot of the people that are, what's interesting about tech is that the founders are running the companies. If you think about that, the founders are not running the car companies, they're not running Hollywood. The founders like living here. They went to Stanford, they went to Berkeley, they like living in this area. And so the center of these companies are going to stay here until that changes. And I think for good reason. You have Stanford here, you've got the VCs here, you've got the entrepreneurs, you've got the companies that shoot off of the big companies. It's an ecosystem that's very hard to beat.
There is, go ahead, Paul.
I was
Yeah.
going to say, always in Silicon Valley, people are talking about what is the next big thing. Did you get any buzz at this conference, or you probably brought some yourself,
Yeah.
but what is the next big thing or two that you see sort of around the corner for Silicon Valley?
There's two things. One is mobile. The shift to mobile is so fast and so quick that so many companies are being sort of whipsawed by this mobile revolution. This is tablets and devices and other things like that. And so I think every company has to rethink its strategies around it. So I think mobile is the number one most important trend going on. And these devices continue to become cheaper and more robust, and ability to do more on them. And so that's really the big trend right now going on. The second one is big data, the ability to take all this data and do stuff with it in more interesting ways. And the other one is sort of computational things within the Internet of Things, it's called, like the idea of the Google car or the Google Glass, but Nest in your home and that stuff. So you can take, or these parking meters we have, and all kinds of parking apps
Smart
and things like
meters
that. Smart meters and your phone, but your phone being at the center of it, powering all this. And so I think probably the Internet of Things is the most interesting thing, because who doesn't love a self-driving car story kind of thing? It's just kind of irresistible. And the glasses, and you click and stuff like that. But I think the idea
You
of
gonna
these
wear those
things,
glasses?
never. I happen to be married, but I someday want to date, perhaps. So it's just they're super nerdy. They will get more attractive, and eventually, they'll just be the eye. They'll just
Right.
put a new eye in
Yeah,
for
be like
you.
contacts.
It'll be like the Terminator or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
And so you'll go do-do-do-do.
One of the things that came out also in the study was that there's a growing income disparity, especially minorities, African Americans, Latinos being left behind. Other than giving lip service to that kind of thing, do the leaders in the Valley really care about that?
It's a whole lot of white guys. It really is. I mean, it just is.
Young white guys.
Young white guys. And it's more diverse and tolerant. So for sure, compared to other industries, it's way further down. But they definitely, we talked about that on one of the panels today, there isn't enough diversity in the industry. And it's because, girls aren't coming up in computer science enough, minorities are not coming up in computer science enough, and really everything focuses on the engineer and computer science. And so until that changes, you're not going to see as diverse a community as you want. There are attempts at it, and it's not just lip service, because diverse cultures make better companies in these places. But yes, it's a problem. And it's, and that's what's going to happen. You have this elite core of workers, and you're going to have the people that serve them. And so that's an interesting problem for the Bay Area.
And what about, they can address some of those things with schools and education. They don't have to necessarily be working in the tech industry. Was there much discussion about that kind of thing?
Well, the whole argument of the tech industry is they're creating jobs, like Uber. It creates, everyone becomes an entrepreneur. These new tech revolutions, everyone's an entrepreneur. Well, everyone can't be an entrepreneur, but it does sort of suggest a society of entrepreneurialism over, the basic jobs we think of.
Yeah. Well, Kara, thanks very much. Heady times in Silicon Valley for good reason, and at the same time, some storm clouds over the medical marijuana industry. The state Supreme Court this week hearing arguments about a case involving just how much latitude local governments have in banning pot dispensaries, even though voters said medical marijuana is legal. Peter, what's at the heart of that argument?
Well, there's two narratives to follow here. One is the specific narrative, and in this narrative, the Supreme Court does seem very predisposed to uphold the right of local cities and counties to ban medical marijuana dispensaries. But the larger narrative is the vagueness of California's medical marijuana laws, even though we were the pioneering state for legalizing medical marijuana. And basically we are at the point now where we have $1 billion industry that hangs on the thread of language which essentially says that qualified marijuana patients can collectively or cooperatively cultivate marijuana for medical purposes. That's it. It doesn't say anything about distribution. It doesn't say anything about transactions of money. It doesn't say anything about stores or storefronts. So California just has not put rules in place. Another state like Colorado has. It's getting less federal intervention than we're facing right now. So there's a lot of issues that are being raised that come out of this
And
this
so the
matter.
question is why? Why hasn't the legislature, now they've got a supermajority of Democrats, what could happen that the legislature hasn't done? Just bringing clarity to those questions?
Well, there's two issues. There's an utter lack of courage in the legislature to take on the issue. Despite the fact that medical marijuana as legality of medical marijuana is overwhelmingly approved by voters. Law enforcement doesn't support legislation. Lawmakers don't want to take it on. And the marijuana community itself is very divided, and they're leaning over backwards to satisfy the narrowest of constituencies. And they want regulation in name, but they're really reluctant to seek regulation in specific detail. So it's very cloudy.
You mentioned Colorado. It was interesting to me that Colorado voters legalized marijuana the last time around in November for pretty much all uses, as I understand it. And California voters, a couple of cycles ago, didn't. Are the pro-legalization people going to take another run at it on the California ballot in like 2016? Or I'm assuming they wouldn't want to go in an off year, 2014, but when are they going to try to put California in that group of 2 or 3 states that have actually legalized it entirely?
They are. They're going to put it on the ballot in 2016. There may be some groups that will try for 2014, but the major funders are staying out till 2016. And the very interesting thing there are a couple of interesting things about Colorado. When California Proposition 19 was on the ballot in 2010, which was a non-presidential year, lousy voting pool.
Tea Party year.
But it was winning in the polls by 8 to 11 points, depending on what poll you checked. And then Eric Holder came out. He got a letter from former Drug Enforcement Administration administrators saying, you got to stop this. He comes out and he basically says, we're not going to stand for legal marijuana in California, and anybody who pays taxes to California is going to be admitting to a federal crime. Well, guess what happened in Colorado? None of that. Colorado is a swing state. The DEA administrators wrote a letter this time. Holder stayed silent.
What about Washington State, though? I mean, that's a blue state. Why the disparity? It does seem that they're kind of picking on California in a way.
Well, it really boils down to our earlier discussion of regulation. Colorado has very rigorous regulations. Every single person who works in the medical marijuana industry in Colorado is licensed and background checked by the state. The dispensaries grow their own marijuana in videotaped cultivation rooms. They file shipping manifests to track the marijuana from the room to the dispensary, and then all the transactions are videotaped. California has none of that.
But that's inevitable when these things start to really move all across the country. They're going to have to behave this way just like they do with liquor, the liquor industry and others. They're not going to be able to do the loosey-goosey kind of thing.
Well, and the feds are very concerned about diversion. And so what's happened is...
Meaning
Shrinkage.
Meaning taking it from the legal market and putting it into the illegal market, into the black market. And so in Colorado, diversion is a lot harder to do than in California. But the California movement is not comfortable with licensed employees. It's not comfortable with videotaping. And there is this mythology that has evolved in California that anybody with a medical marijuana card can make a living selling into dispensaries. And so the movement wants to make sure that people in Humboldt and Mendocino have access to the market. Well, Colorado cut a lot of the small growers out of the market because it was just too difficult to enforce. So California is a much bigger market, but it's also much older, much more established, and much more factionalized, and hence much more complicated.
But the court made it sound like they weren't going to throw these guys a bone at all, that they were going to allow cities to continue to shut down dispensaries, right? I mean, that's the sort of Reader's Digest version of what the justices are saying.
It didn't look like it was going too well in there for the marijuana advocates. But also you might know that Colorado also allows local bans and so forth. But the key thing for the movement is, in terms of their longevity and their health, would be some action in the legislature. I'm not convinced it's going to happen. I think it's a better chance of happening this year than last year.
Well, it's all good news for your book when it comes out, right?
Hopefully, yes.
People love pot, right?
People love pot.
Good
It
for
does
you.
draw a lot of interest.
On the other hand, people don't love sharks so much. And Paul, this week, and I have mixed feelings about this because I'm a scuba diver, but the State Fish and Game Commission moved a step closer to possibly protecting the great white shark, putting it on the endangered species list. I thought they could fend for themselves. What is it about these sharks that makes them so vulnerable?
Well, people do love sharks in California, just like they love mountain lions. They love these charismatic megafauna. They like to follow them. And, you know, in California, there's a lot of sort of jokes about sharks eating people. But if you actually look at the data, going back to 1952, tens, probably hundreds of millions of people have gone to the beach in California and got in the water. They have surfed, they have scuba dived. I'm a scuba diver too. And only 13 people have been killed by white sharks since 1952. More people have died from bee stings and dog bites and hitting deer with their cars than have died from white sharks. And what the State Fish and Game Commission did this week on Wednesday, they voted unanimously to move forward with listing the great white shark in California on California's endangered species list. And what that means is the state will take a year to study it. They'll come back and vote again next spring. I would expect there's a good chance they're going to put it on the list, which will mean that fishermen in Southern California who use these big gill nets may be shut down. They'll have to bring the nets up every 24 hours so they don't drown juvenile sharks in there as they are now. The law may even allow environmentalists to block coal-fired power plants, because when you burn coal, you burn mercury, it vaporizes, it goes up, it rains down into the water, and these sharks have high levels of mercury because they're at the top of the food chain, and little fish get mercury and it works its way up. So if you can show that mercury is harming sharks, you might be able to make it harder to relicense a coal-fired power plant, for example.
Yeah.
But humans hurt sharks more than the other way around. You know, even though the movies all depict this idea of a shark being more dangerous, except only when you're in the water.
Yeah.
You know, on a surfboard, are they more dangerous?
Absolutely. Something like 70 million sharks a year, and this is all types, not just white sharks, are killed mostly for finning. And there's a huge market in China, as we know. And what's interesting about California is California has led the way in the past on shark protection. In 1993, Pete Wilson signed a law that banned all hunting of sharks in great white sharks out to 3 miles in state waters. Jerry Brown, as we may remember, in 2011, signed a bill banning the possession or sale of shark fins, which got a lot of the Chinese restaurants in LA and the Bay Area upset because it's illegal to serve shark fin soup. But a lot of environmentalists were really nervous because there have been a couple of recent studies that estimated the population at something like 300 to 400 adults. And if only half of those are female, they're saying that's a pretty low number.
Yeah. We're talking now about putting the shark on the state endangered species list. How is that different from the federal endangered list?
California is one of the only states that has its own separate endangered species list. It has similar rules to the federal one. The feds are looking at great white sharks right now as well and are going to decide in June whether to list them. What's different is that in California's law, once you become a candidate and you're being studied, the rules protecting endangered species kick in. The federal rules don't until you're already listed. So right now, these fishermen in Southern California have about 90 days to apply for a permit, which they may not get. And these fishermen produce something like 75% of all the halibut caught in California. So they're really upset. And it's an interesting thing because the great white shark scientists, the top scientists in the state, are saying, wait a minute, we're not sure they need to be listed. We don't have enough data. They don't have a trend line showing where the population is going up or down. They're worried that it's going to be harder to do research and get permits for their own work. And it's a new kind of a science to put satellite tags on these animals, to take photos of their fins and measure them and put them in databases. And very little is actually known about them when you consider how much ink and how much TV time they get.
So other than fishermen, who's going to be the big lobbyist to keep that off the list?
I don't know that a lot of these top scientists are going to actually be really begging for it. A few of them have written letters. I mean, like the chair of aquatic biology at the Cal Academy of Science, 40-year shark expert John McCosker, is saying, I don't think they need to be listed.
Well, who does?
It's mostly the environmentalists at this point.
All right. Well, we'll come back to that, no doubt.
1 year from now.
1 year from now. Thank you, Paul. Well, now we go on to another environmental story, this one on dry land, and it involves the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition. Over the past 6 years, the number of commuters using bikes in the city has risen dramatically. They'd like nothing more than to see those numbers continue going up. And to that end, the influential advocacy group is lobbying hard for the city's transportation agency to pour a bigger chunk of its budget into bicycling improvements and develop a plan to make San Francisco on par with cities like Amsterdam, where commuting by bike is standard practice. Earlier today, I sat down with Leah, Shahum, head of the Bike Coalition, to hear her vision for the future of cycling in the city. Leah, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Well, let's talk about money and plans. The city is proposing to spend about $200 million to improve and expand biking in the city. And your group says, well, that's nice, but it's not really enough. In fact, it's not even close to enough. So if $200 million isn't enough, what would you like to see, and how would the money be spent?
That's right. The city's own plans actually call for spending $500 million over the next 5 years to bring San Francisco up to what is really a top-tier bicycling city. When you look at places like Amsterdam and Copenhagen, where they're seeing 30 or 40% of trips made by bicycle, we know that's possible. And in fact, we've seen San Francisco itself increase biking by about 70% just in the last 5 years. So the city has set its sights for dramatically increasing even more the number of bike trips in the city, and has actually set that money goal at $500 million over the next 5 years. We think that's a worthwhile goal.
You think it should be more, though? And how? Tell me, how should the money be spent? We're seeing more bike lanes. We're seeing other things that are making it easier and more visible for bikers to be safe on the roads. But how should that additional money be spent?
That's right. One of the great things about investing in bicycling is that it's remarkably cheap and pretty quick to make the difference. As much as we need to also invest in transit systems, we also know what a long lead time there is there to build, whether it be a bus rapid transit system or central subway or new roads. It's a very long time and a lot of money. We need to invest in those. But in the meantime, just in a matter of years, we can paint new bikeways, we can add new bike parking racks, we can really create education and encouragement systems that help literally tens of thousands of more people bicycle for pennies on the dollar of what these other major transportation projects cost. So really what we're calling for is the city to invest wisely and quickly in what we think will be a quick way to move more people around to their jobs, to school, everywhere.
But the pool of money, the pie, is like one size, more or less.
That's right. Right now.
So if you take money, what are you going to take money away from?
Yeah, good point. San Francisco is woefully underspending right now. It's less than 0.5% of the city's transportation capital budget. What we're calling for in spending that larger amount would still only be 8% of its overall capital budget.
That's that's 16-fold increase, right?
That's right. But moving what we think can be a very significant number of people, going from what is now estimated to be 3 or 4% of trips to up to 20% of trips by bicycle in the year 2020, which is the city's goal. So we know it is an increase, but still a very relatively modest number of the overall budget.
So what would we not spend money on then?
Great point. I think we've got to find new sources first and foremost. There's the opportunities coming up, such as the vehicle license fee. The state has given us the ability, and we hope to see that ability used soon to slightly raise the vehicle license fee here in the city and have that go towards transportation purposes. There's different bond measures being considered, and there's ways we can use the existing funds more creatively.
Let me ask you, if you're a driver, and I drive and I bike and I walk, but if you're a driver, you're seeing more parking meters go up, you're seeing the parking meter fines in some case and enforcement going up, you're seeing parking spaces being taken away for bike lanes. So I'm wondering, is part of the overall strategy to make it a little less comfortable to drive a car in the city?
Right. It's a good question. The city has set a goal of reducing private auto trips. It's part of the Transportation Agency's overall strategy to reduce auto trips in the next 5 years by about 11%. Now, how will they do that? They'll grow transit trips. They'll grow bicycling, walking, taxi cab trips, and car share. So there is a method really to get to that. What I'd say is, particularly with things like parking, there's a goal to really think about parking management. How do we have more parking turnover so that people aren't necessarily sitting in one space all day, but turning over so that businesses are getting more customers?
And when you look at San Francisco and some of the things that we've done here in the city to make biking more popular, and it does seem to be working, how do we compare? How do we stack up with other cities of a similar size?
Yeah. We're doing pretty well, but we're not at the top of the list. We have places like Portland that have higher bike ridership number than our own. We have places like Chicago that are literally building dozens of bikeways per year, and these are physically separated bikeways. I want to make that note because we really have evolved the thinking in
When you say physically, do you mean like with a raised road like they do, say, in Amsterdam and Copenhagen?
That's right. It could be an actual physical separation, or it may be places like, you may know, Market Street, where a section of that street the bikeway has been painted green, and there are white small posts in between. And I want to note these are really, again, cheap and inexpensive and quick ways bikeways to make real separation between the motor vehicle traffic and the bicycle traffic. But this is what we're seeing cities across the country do. New York City, Chicago, Portland, Washington, D.C. is a great example.
I was just in D.C. and in Mexico City. Both have bike sharing now. Is that in the pipeline for San Francisco? And what's taking so long?
I'm happy to report it's coming. San Francisco and the South Bay, actually, all the way down to San Jose, will have bike share coming. We hope this summer. It's been a bit delayed, and that's been frustrating, but the city is committed to starting a 1,000 bike share program. We're seeing a ton of interest from companies. A lot of people who really see this as a mobility need for their workforce.
And just a few seconds left, but what would you say is your dream? Like, what would you like to see, big picture, in 3-5 years in San Francisco?
We want to see every neighborhood in the city connected with great bikeways that are inviting, safe, comfortable for people ages 8 to 80, so that the thousands, tens of thousands of people who want to be bicycling in our city can be.
How many new miles of bike lanes would that require?
Yeah. Our goal, and I think we can get there, is 100 miles of new bikeways by the year 2020, and to reach that goal of 20% of trips of people biking by 2020.
All right. Well, Leah, Shahum, thank you so much. Ride safely.
Thanks so much. See you out there in the bike lanes.
You will. And that's all the time we have for tonight. Thanks to all of our guests, Peter, Paul, Kara, almost Peter, Paul, and Mary.
No, sorry.
Not quite. Well, you can visit kqed.org/thisweek. You'll find our show archives. You can also subscribe to our newsletter and podcast. And if you feel like it, you can share your story, ideas, and thoughts about the program. All those things you can find, again, at our website. I'm Scott Shafer, wishing everyone a happy Lunar New Year in this, the year of the snake. Good night.